You're looking at the heart of biblical Israel.
This is ancient Shiloh, the place where the Bible says Joshua divided the promised land between the 12 tribes.
For centuries, the Bible has been read as both sacred scripture and a collection of ancient stories. But what happens when spades in the soil and fragments of parchment begin to confirm those very accounts? On a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, the conversation zeroed in on archaeologists who just discovered a 3,000-year-old biblical evidence that changes everything we know. What if the story of Samuel hearing God's call, Eli's final days, and the Ark of the Covenant resting in Shiloh weren't just theological traditions? Well, the line between faith and history grows thinner than ever. Today, we'll unveil everything. Ancient Shiloh, the first central sanctuary, situated in the hill country of Ephraim, about 31 kilometers north of Jerusalem. Shiloh is repeatedly referenced in the Hebrew Bible as Israel's first spiritual and political hub. The book of Joshua describes how, following the conquest of Canaan, the Israelites erected the tabernacle at Shiloh, making it the central place of worship and national gathering.
Explore this historic site right here in the land of the Bible.
For over 3 centuries, this site is said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that symbolized God's presence and guided the people of Israel through the wilderness. Before Jerusalem rose under King David as the heart of Israelite religion, Shiloh represented the first attempt at a permanent spiritual center. It was here that the young boy Samuel was dedicated by his mother Hannah to the priestly service. In the sanctuary, Samuel later heard God's voice for the first time, marking his emergence as one of Israel's great prophets. The site was also tied to the priest Eli, whose death followed news of the ark's capture by the Philistines in the Battle of Aphek. Beyond being a cultic center, it was also a gathering place for the tribes. For centuries, however, the precise historical reality remained elusive. Archaeologists began systematic excavations at Shiloh in the early 20th century, with work by Danish expeditions under Hans Kjær and later by Israeli scholars such as Israel Finkelstein in the 1980s. The site revealed remains of settlement layers stretching from the Middle Bronze Age through the Iron Age and into the Byzantine period, showing that Shiloh was occupied and reoccupied for centuries. Of particular interest have been layers dated to the Late Bronze Age, around 1550 to 1200 BCE, and the Iron Age, around 1200 to 1000 BCE, which overlap with the period traditionally associated with the Judges and the early monarchy. Recent excavations, particularly those conducted since 2017 by the Associates for Biblical Research under the direction of Dr. Scott Stripling, have reignited debates about Shiloh's role. These digs have unearthed altar fragments, storage jars, and concentrations of animal bones that point toward organized ritual activity. Many of the bones belong to animals considered ritually clean in biblical lore, sheep, goats, and cattle, and were found in deposits. This suggests mass feasting, possibly in connection with sacrificial rituals. The scale of these remains aligns with the biblical portrayal of Shiloh as a place where tribes gathered to worship and celebrate before the Lord. Additionally, stone fragments interpreted as parts of a monumental altar or cultic installation tell us that the vestiges of Israel's earliest sanctuary may indeed lie beneath the ruins. The discoveries gain further weight when viewed alongside the biblical descriptions of cultic practice. For example, Joshua 18 describes the division of the land among the tribes at Shiloh before the Lord, while 1 Samuel 1 recounts annual pilgrimages made by Elkanah and his family. The presence of large storage vessels uncovered at the site suggests provisions for feeding many people. Archaeologists have also noted the discovery of ceramic typologies from the Late Bronze to Iron transition, reinforcing the idea that Shiloh was not a minor village but a site of regional significance. Comparable discoveries at sites such as Arad, Beersheba, and Tel Dan have highlighted the prevalence of regional sanctuaries before the centralization of worship in Jerusalem under Solomon. At Shiloh, however, the concentration of remains and the biblical specificity elevate its importance. If the bone deposits and altar fragments do reflect large-scale sacrificial feasts, then Shiloh was far from a marginal cult site. It was a hub of ritual life for multiple tribes. The significance of Shiloh also extends into later history. By the time of the prophet Jeremiah, Writing centuries after Samuel and Eli, Shiloh had become a cautionary symbol. Jeremiah 7:12-14 recalls how God allowed the sanctuary at Shiloh to be destroyed because of Israel's disobedience, warning Jerusalem that it too was not invulnerable. Archaeological evidence of destruction at Shiloh around the mid-11th century BCE, potentially tied to Philistine incursions, may correspond with this tradition. Whether the ark was truly captured and Shiloh devastated in the manner 1 Samuel describes, the convergence of destruction layers and biblical memory reinforces Shiloh's role as a site of both glory and loss. For believers, the finds at Shiloh are not just stones and bones, but tangible confirmations that the places where biblical figures walked can still be touched. For scholars, the task remains to situate Shiloh within the broader landscape of ancient Near Eastern religion. It was a living, breathing sanctuary where people gathered to worship, feast, and seek divine guidance long before Jerusalem's temple rose. That recognition alone changes how we view the origins of Israelite religion and the enduring power of its earliest sacred places. So, what do we know about it? What the evidence suggests? One of the most striking sets of finds has been the vast collection of animal bones uncovered in multiple excavation seasons. Studies led by the Danish expeditions in the 1920s under Hans Kjær, and later more recent teams including the Associates for Biblical Research in the 2010s and 2020s, revealed concentrated deposits of animal remains. These were not scattered randomly, but instead accumulated in clearly designated areas that bore evidence of deliberate slaughter and disposal. Many of the bones show cut marks and burn traces, suggesting that they were part of ritual sacrifice rather than mere domestic consumption. Zooarchaeological analysis has identified a predominance of bones from kosher animals such as sheep, goats, and cattle, aligning with descriptions in Levitical texts of what could be offered in sacrifice. The concentration of right-side bones in some deposits is particularly striking, since biblical prescriptions emphasize offering the right portions in certain rituals. Moreover, large storage jars, some nearly a meter high, were found embedded in the earth near what appears to have been a substantial platform or courtyard. The jars suggest centralized storage and redistribution of offerings, possibly grain or wine, further supporting Shiloh's function as a cultic hub. Even more compelling are the foundations and wall segments uncovered that some archaeologists argue could have supported a large, rectangular structure. Although no complete building outline has survived, the dimensions of the remaining walls suggest a footprint large enough to accommodate a sanctuary or tabernacle-style complex. This possibility resonates with the biblical tradition that describes Shiloh as the site of the tabernacle and Ark of the Covenant before their relocation to Jerusalem under King David. The Ark of the Covenant, according to the Hebrew Bible, was housed at Shiloh for an extended period after the conquest narratives of Joshua. In 1 Samuel 3, the boy Samuel is described sleeping in the temple of the Lord, where the Ark of God was. This reference has fueled centuries of speculation about the precise nature of Shiloh's sanctuary. Was it a permanent structure built to house the Ark, or did the tabernacle, traditionally thought of as a mobile tent shrine, acquire semi-permanent housing here? Archaeological evidence cannot yet confirm either scenario definitively, but the presence of monumental remains indicates that by the early Iron Age, Shiloh was more than a simple village with a tent. The discovery of a large stone platform in the northern part of the site, first noted in Danish excavations and later revisited, adds weight to the idea of an organized cultic installation. If the Ark did rest at Shiloh, these remains could be the physical traces of its earliest long-term home. Despite the excitement, scholars have been careful to urge restraint in drawing conclusions. Correlation between archaeological finds and biblical narratives does not necessarily equate to proof. The animal bones, for example, could indicate ritual sacrifice, but ritualized slaughter was common across the ancient Near East. Sites in Canaanite and Philistine contexts have revealed similar deposits, sometimes with comparable patterns of species selection. Likewise, monumental structures and storage facilities are not unique to the Israelite religion. They appear in other cultures' cultic centers as well. Archaeologists such as Israel Finkelstein, who has extensively studied Shiloh and the Highland settlements, argue that while the finds affirm Shiloh's role as a major Highland sanctuary, linking them directly to the Ark or to specific biblical episodes, remains interpretive rather than demonstrable. In any case, the biblical account in Judges 21 describes large annual festivals at Shiloh, where the daughters of Shiloh danced in vineyards, hinting at gatherings that were social as well as religious. Archaeological signs of intensive activity align with the idea of such large-scale periodic pilgrimages. The discovery of ceramic assemblages spanning multiple regions supports this as well. Excavators have identified a major destruction event around 1050 BCE, consistent with the biblical narrative of Shiloh's downfall during the Philistine incursions described in 1 Samuel chapter 4. That text recounts the Philistines capturing the ark after the Battle of Ebenezer, leading to Eli's death and the subsequent decline of Shiloh's centrality. While the ark's seizure is theological in tone, the archaeological evidence of a violent end to Shiloh's prominence at roughly the same time highlights the historical plausibility of the narrative framework. The destruction layer contained collapsed mud brick, burnt remains, and abandoned cultic vessels, all hallmarks of sudden catastrophe. Modern scientific methods have sharpened these findings. Radiocarbon dating of organic samples from relevant layers supports the early Iron Age timeframe, aligning with traditional chronologies of Israel's tribal period. Advanced zooarchaeological methods, including isotopic analysis, have been employed on bone deposits to determine the age and diet of sacrificial animals, providing further insight into ritual selectivity. The predominance of young male animals, for instance, parallels biblical preferences for unblemished offerings. Overall, the convergence of data points to Shiloh being the epicenter of a community whose religious practices closely resembled those described in the Hebrew Bible. It provides a tangible backdrop against which stories of Eli, Samuel, and the Ark's capture gain historical depth. While the debate over correlation versus proof will continue, the finds ensure that Shiloh remains pivotal in discussions of biblical archaeology, bridging the gap between text and earth, memory and material culture. Shiloh, while important, is part of a bigger picture. Other major finds in the context of biblical archaeology. Over the past century and a half, some of the most significant discoveries have not only illuminated the ancient world of Israel and Judah, but also touched directly upon figures and events central to biblical narratives. Taken together, they reveal that the Bible was not composed in a vacuum, but in the midst of real political struggles, cultural shifts, and human lives that left their imprint in the material record. Among the most famous and influential finds is the Tel Dan Stele, unearthed in 1993 in northern Israel. This broken basalt monument, dating to the 9th century BCE, contains an inscription in Aramaic that mentions the House of David. The phrase is widely interpreted as a reference to the dynasty founded by King David, making it the earliest extra-biblical evidence for his existence. Before this discovery, some scholars argued that David was purely a literary creation of later Jewish scribes. The Tel Dan Stele effectively countered this skepticism, showing that David's line was recognized by Israel's neighbors within a century of his reign. The Stele situates the biblical accounts of 1 and 2 Samuel within a plausible historical framework, affirming that the rise of the Judahite monarchy had tangible consequences beyond biblical storytelling. Another set of discoveries that revolutionized biblical studies came from the caves of Qumran, overlooking the Dead Sea. Between 1947 and 1956, Bedouin shepherds and archaeologists uncovered what are now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, dating from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. These roughly 900 scrolls include portions of every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, as well as sectarian writings and commentaries. They bridge the gap between the Hebrew Bible as it existed in antiquity and the manuscripts preserved 1,000 years later. The famous Isaiah scroll, for example, is remarkably close to the later Masoretic text, suggesting remarkable textual continuity. Similarly, the Mesha Stele, or Moabite stone, discovered in 1868 in present-day Jordan, offers another window into the world of biblical history. This black basalt stone, standing over a meter high, contains a 9th century BCE inscription by King Mesha of Moab, describing his rebellion against Israelite domination. The text parallels events recounted in 2 Kings 1003, where Mesha's uprising against King Jehoram is recorded. Written in Moabite, a language closely related to Hebrew, the stele gives voice to Israel's neighbor and adversary, revealing how Moab interpreted its struggle for independence. It demonstrates how biblical conflicts were part of a larger geopolitical fabric. In Jerusalem, archaeological discoveries have provided some of the most striking links between scripture and material evidence. One of the most celebrated examples is Hezekiah's Tunnel, an underground aqueduct stretching more than 500 meters through solid rock. Constructed in the late 8th century BCE to secure Jerusalem's water supply during the Assyrian threat, the tunnel is explicitly mentioned in 2 Kings 20:20 and 2 Chronicles 32:30. The discovery of the Siloam inscription within the tunnel, carved by the workers who dug it, vividly describes the moment when two teams met in the middle, completing the passage. The existence of this tunnel, confirmed both archaeologically and textually, reflects the Bible's historical grounding. Moreover, Assyrian records, such as Sennacherib's Annals from Nineveh, corroborate the biblical account of the Assyrian campaign, describing how Jerusalem was besieged, though not destroyed. The wider geopolitical stage of the Bible is also illuminated by the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, discovered in 1846 at Nimrud, in modern Iraq. Dating to the 9th century BCE, the obelisk portrays a kneeling figure identified as Jehu, king of Israel, paying tribute to the Assyrian monarch. This is the earliest known depiction of an Israelite king and a striking visual confirmation of the dynamics described in 2 Kings. Archaeology has also illuminated figures from the New Testament. In 1990, the ossuary of Caiaphas, the high priest mentioned in the Gospels as presiding over the trial of Jesus, was discovered in Jerusalem. The ornate limestone box, inscribed Joseph, son of Caiaphas, is widely accepted as his burial container. Similarly, the discovery of the Pilate stone in 1961 at Caesarea Maritima provided material evidence for Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea, known from the Passion narratives. The inscription, dedicated to Tiberius Caesar, names Pilate as prefect and affirms his role in administering the region during Jesus' lifetime. Until this discovery, Pilate's existence was known only from literary texts such as the Gospels, Josephus, and Tacitus. The stone transformed him from a literary figure into a historically grounded one, offering a firmer basis for situating the crucifixion within Roman administrative history. These discoveries together illustrate the profound interplay between text and artifact. They show how the biblical world was deeply rooted in the political, cultural, and religious realities of the ancient Near East. They remind us that the figures of David, Hezekiah, Mesha, Jehu, Caiaphas, and Pilate were not merely literary characters, but historical actors. So why does this matter today? The Joe Rogan Experience perspective. On the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, biblical archaeology has moved from niche scholarship to mass audience conversation. The clearest New Testament touchpoint came with Wesley Huff in January 2025, where Rogan is presented with a facsimile of Papyrus 52, John Ryland's Library Papyrus P52, typically dated to around AD 125 to 150, and containing lines from John 18. That on-air exchange gave millions of listeners a concrete artifact to latch onto. Rogan's show has also become a clearinghouse for public arguments over evidence, method, and speculation. The most important inflection point was in April 2024, when a 4+ hour debate erupted between archaeologist Flint Dibble of Cardiff University and author Graham Hancock.
Every step, every dive for the last 30+ years, this is her aerial photograph of the Sphinx enclosure.
Whatever one thinks of Hancock's lost civilization proposals, the episode modelled a live clash between field archaeology and popular alternative theories, drawing millions of views and follow-on commentary from archaeologists and skeptics alike. Dibble, whose research focuses on ancient foodways and who has been active in debunking pseudo-archaeology, used the platform to emphasize stratigraphy, context, and the burden of proof. Hancock highlighted anomalies and gaps he believes merit re-evaluation. The format mattered. Rogan let the evidence and counter-evidence breathe, and the internet litigated the claims for weeks. Those debates didn't happen in a vacuum. Rogan has returned to Graham Hancock repeatedly in episodes that together have racked up tens of millions of views across platforms. These appearances pushed discussions of radiocarbon chronologies, post-Younger Dryas climate shifts, and megalithic architecture into mainstream feeds. Even where the focus is pre-biblical, the knock-on effect is that large audiences become conversant in the difference between inscriptions, stratified deposits, and standalone mystery artifacts. This is exactly the kind of literacy you need when the topic turns to biblical sites. For centuries, biblical stories existed in a realm of faith, tradition, and interpretation. Shiloh's layers of faunal remains, architectural traces, and cultic fragments take an ancient text's claim about a central place of worship and ask, is there evidence in the soil that a people once organized their life around such a site? Papyrus 52, fragile and incomplete though it is, compresses the gap between the composition of the Gospel of John and our earliest surviving copy, showing how quickly oral proclamation moved into written circulation. Other discoveries, from seal impressions to monumental gates, do the same. For those of faith, finds like Shiloh and P52 are not proof, but they are anchors, reminders that their tradition is not untethered myth, but intertwined with lived history. And in a cultural moment where podcasts, viral clips, and online debates have put archaeology and manuscripts into mainstream conversation, this matters all the more. These findings and discussions collapse the distance between the ancient and the modern. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.